Thanks everybody for joining. So we are going to record this just for your information. I'm Aaron Burney. You guys probably know me. I'm the program manager for IPC's Education Foundation, running the IPC Student Chapter program. We have Randy Cherry with us today. He is IPC's Director of Validation Services. He's been in industry for about 35 years. Randy's done a lot in many different facets of the industry. He's a certified interconnect designer. I know he has a few other certifications in other roles, but I will let Randy chat about our validation services and how we approach cybersecurity. So thanks for joining us, and I'll toss it over to Randy.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate the intro, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining today, and I'll try to go through these slides. I'll try to talk slow, or if I go too fast, like I said, please stop me. But hopefully the way I've designed this presentation, it should answer most of the questions. Basically, I've been with IPC almost 8 years now. And as Aaron mentioned prior to that, I'd worked in the manufacturing world for almost 35 years in a lot of different areas, most of it in telecommunications. So I've done a lot of different things over my career. So, but anyway, let's get started. Basically, what we're going to talk about today, is with IPC Validation Services, is the department that I run, and the trusted supplier. What we're really going to focus on today is cybersecurity, as Aaron mentioned. And I know cybersecurity is a very broad topic. For example, we're not going to talk about cybersecurity like protecting your own personal bank accounts or your social security number and all that type of stuff. We're not going to get into that type of cybersecurity. But the agenda that we're going to talk about today's presentation, basically we're going to focus on the Department of Defense. That's going to be our focus today, and the prime contractor. And I'm going to talk more about this as we go through the presentation, but the prime contractor, just to let everybody know what we're talking about there, those are your big companies that supply products and services to the DoD. And some examples of your prime contractors would be your Lockheed Martins, your Northrop Grummans, Raytheons, Boeing, BAE Systems, Mercury Systems. You guys get the general idea. They're pretty large companies. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about what CUI is and what CTI is, and I'm going to define all these. We're going to talk about the cybersecurity framework and the government regulations that are in place today that control that. We're also going to talk about what IPC is doing, the company that Aaron and I work for. We have a standard called the Trusted Supplier. It's the IPC 1791. We're going to talk about that. And in Validation Services, the department that I'm in charge of, we're going to talk about the 1791 QML certification program. And we're going to talk about what QML means later and things like that. And basically, I should have highlighted that Validation Services, we are an audit certification department. And we also do some technology solutions type work, which is problem solving, troubleshooting, things like that. But mostly what we do is we audit and certify companies to the IPC standard. And like I said, I'll elaborate more on that. But this particular program that we're going to talk about here, we have 4 basic certifications based around the printed board designer, the fabricator, the assembler, and the cable and wire harness assembler. And I'm going to go in more detail on each one of these, because I imagine already people got questions like, what the heck is this guy talking about? But like I said, I'll break it down and we'll go through each of these items. But today, what I want to focus on today is cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. What I'm going to show you next is some pictures of what some of these things that we're talking about. I'm not going to assume people know what circuit boards and cable and wire harnesses are, so I put some examples up here. You can see up here, if I get my mouse working, you can see up here in the upper left-hand corner, this is just a picture of a bare circuit board with some component designators here. You can see like R632, C636. These are just locations for resistors and capacitors. Here's one for a diode. But this is what a bare circuit board looks like. And you can see it has kind of a silver tin finish on it here. Down below, you'll see another bare circuit board. Once again, this has got a gold finish on it, has a lot of different footprints for a lot of different components. and some gold edge connectors here that this circuit board would plug into a connector. And then here in the middle, you see a populated circuit board. And these are some pictures, once again, I got from the IPC archives. This particular board, as you can see, has components on it, but you see there's a little red arrow here, and I just kind of inherited this picture. And so before someone asked me what the red arrow does, the red arrow is showing that we have a poor solder connection here. This is actually showing a solder defect, but I grabbed this picture just so you can see what a populated circuit board looks like. And then over here to the right, we have a wire harness here with these green and white wires. They're held together with a little cable tie. And then these wires have terminals that are plugged into this connector housing here. And this connector housing could plug into a server or some type of an enclosure. And it snaps in, and you got a couple of screws on each side. And then down here at the bottom is more of a complicated cable harness. And I don't know if it shows up really well here, but you can see terminations. There's connectors terminated on all these different wires here that are part of this cable harness. Excuse me. And this harness here is a typical harness that could be used in transportation, like automotive or trucks or a bus, something like that. That's where I grabbed this harness. You can see it's fairly complex. So when I'm talking again about circuit boards, design, fabrication, and assembly, we're talking about these things here. And then with the cable and wire harness assembly, we're talking about these things over to the right. So this should hopefully give you a little bit of a general overview. The next thing we're going to talk about with this cybersecurity presentation is what are we actually protecting? And to no surprise, we're obviously protecting the data that's shared up in the cloud. Here's an example of a bunch of computer servers. And one thing that we'll talk about later is when we're doing audits and certifying companies, we want to make sure that their server rooms are locked or they have a badge access, and only certain people can get into these rooms, because this is an area where a lot of ideas and things are stolen, or servers are hacked into. Also, we're worried about your computers, your laptops, your PDAs, your smartphones, and anything in here that can be used. And because this is focused more on the Department of Defense, we're also protecting, our safety of our country, our Navy, protecting what we send out in space. This is a picture of the Mars rover I found. And of course, like I said, we're protecting the intellectual property of our military. I got a couple of pictures here that I wanted to talk about a little bit. These are pictures of the F-35 fighter jet that's developed by Lockheed Martin. And down below is a copy of the J-31 China jet. And if you take a look at these two pictures, they look pretty similar. And what I learned was back in 2007, there was a security breach at a subcontractor that was making components for the F-35 and shipping those to Lockheed Martin. And they weren't really sure back in 2007 how bad this breach was. But then later on, when the J-31, excuse me, I apologize, when the J-31 came out, people started looking at these two jets and said, wow, this is quite familiar to the F-35. Not only on the outside, but I was told also on the inside too. Some of the instrument panels, the way things were laid out, the injector seat, things like that were all very similar between these two fighter jets. So once again, what we're talking about here is we have to do a better job at protecting our confidential information. One more slide here I have kind of as a lead in is what's the cost for all this? And I've worked with this company here before on getting costs for cybersecurity, and they had done a survey based on 355 military and defense companies. And I want everybody on the call to focus on this 355 number, because we're going to talk more about that here in a minute. But the focus was on the number of cyber attacks that they have, the average cost of the cyber attacks. And I realize this data is a couple of years old, but you can see just from 2017 to 2018, how much the average cyber crime cost. And they track the data and how much it's increased over the last 5 years. And then another question was asked in this survey to these 355 companies is the number of security breaches they're seeing. And, these are large companies that we're talking about here. And I mentioned earlier, your Lockheed Martins, your Raytheons, your Northrop Grummons, and to see this number of security breaches at a year is just crazy. And then the increase of these over the years. So you can see that this is a very, very serious problem. And we're just, once again, talking about the Department of Defense, just this one industry sector. And as you can tell, the cost is continuing to go up. Even though I don't have the data for this presentation, I can tell you in 2019 and 2020, the cost is going up. Now, I promised you that I would start defining some of these terms that I was talking about. So what we're talking about here is CUI and CTI, and this is controlled unclassified information. We all know that classified information is very important, but a lot of people forget about unclassified information. And I'm just going to kind of read what the definition, I'm not going to read this to you, but you can see what the definition here is we're protecting, but stuff that is not classified, which we've talked about before. And then controlled technical information, this is pretty important too. And we want to protect that because obviously this could be like schematics to circuit boards. This could be work instructions, things that have very detailed information in them. And once again, we want to protect all that information too. Once again, though, but the thing that you want to take away here, this does not include information that is publicly available. Obviously, information that's publicly available, we don't really have to safeguard. And, that could be just some general information like addresses, things that it doesn't pertain to the actual product or the service that the contractors are selling to the DoD. So these first two items here are extremely important, and we're going to talk more about these as we go through the presentation. Now, earlier I described what a prime contractor was, and if you remember on that last slide on the cost, we were talking about 355 companies. Well, I want to tell you, there's over 300,000 companies that supply products and services just to the DoD. And when I first heard that, I was amazed. I mean, like I told you earlier, I came from the telecommunications industry, and there's nowhere near that many companies in telecom. But when I found out there was that many companies working with the Department of Defense, you can see why cybersecurity is a big deal. And, the cost is going to be in the billions, because people want to hack into these companies and steal their secrets. So we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation. Some other acronyms that we're going to talk about here is Nist. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is a government-based program that's been around for a long time, and I'll show you how that all ties in. I use the word IT a lot. That's information technology. That's that's usually, your computer geeks and people who take care of the server rooms, things like that. Another government regulation we're going to talk about is DFARS. That's the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, and I'm going to explain later how that is important. And then I mentioned that Validation Services does audits, and we have a QML. That's your Qualified Manufacturers List. So when a company passes one of these audits that we'll talk about later, you get listed on the QML. And the QML, how should I describe that? That's kind of like achieving a major certification. You can get certifications for individuals, as Aaron mentioned earlier, but you can also get certifications for companies. And the QML is an older military term, and it's a very prestigious level to get to. And then we're going to talk about ITAR, that's your International Traffic and Arms Regulation. Just put it in ITAR, if you ever go to an ITAR facility, you're not allowed to bring in your cell phone. You're not allowed to take pictures. You have to be escorted the whole time you're there as a visitor. Those are some typical ITAR rules. And then another definition we're going to talk about that's kind of different. It's called chain of custody. And that's a series of policies and procedures that control all aspects of the manufacturing process. And earlier, I was talking about printed circuit boards and printed circuit board assembly and printed circuit board design and cable and wire harnesses. Chain of custody is very important when you're talking about the manufacturing of those types of things. All right, we're going to jump in now to the meat of the presentation. We're going to talk about the cybersecurity framework. And right away, this starts with the security officer of any of these companies that we've been talking about earlier. and maintaining compliance to the Nist SP 800-171. So now we're back to the Nist and tie that in together with cybersecurity framework. And that's basically what the 800-171 is, and that's what that's designed to do. And it's designed to protect CUI and CTI. Once again, we're just trying to tie, whoops, sorry, I made a mistake there. We're just trying to tie these things all together. And this includes the unclassified technical information with defense or space applications. So this NIST SP 800-171 basically, once again, is focused just in this industry. And as you can see, it has 110 requirements that have to be met. In IPC, when you see the word shall, that's a hard requirement whenever you see a shall statement in a sentence. So there's 110 of these that have to be met across 14 families. And the focus here is on physical protection of your IT systems again. We're talking about computer servers, data centers, your laptops, your smartphones, any type of portable electronics. Basically, the overall system security is covered by this. And it can sometimes take a company several years to be compliant to these 110 requirements. It's not something you can do in a day or two. And then also it's a requirement to cyber incident reporting. So anytime your company is hacked through a malicious act or sabotage, any type of threats, there's all kinds of different malware things that could happen. To be compliant to this SP 800-171, you have to track all this and record when all this happens so you can present all this to the Department of Defense when they ask for it. And then there's another government regulation that goes along with the NIST. I mentioned the DFARS. It's the 252-204-7012. And the reason the government came out with this regulation, because it ties it all together. It ties together protection for CUI, CTI, and cybersecurity. One regulation that brings it all together. And as we go through this presentation, this should all start to make sense. So everything just kind of flows together here. The next thing I want to talk about is what's IPC's involvement with this. Now, as you know, IPC, we facilitate the writing of a lot of standards. And IPC's focus mostly has been with printed circuit boards, soldering, and cable and wire harnesses. But we're an industry-driven association. And if you're familiar with some of Aaron's past presentations, the industry writes the standards. So we were getting a lot of our members wanted to get together and write a standard that would look at cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. And that's basically what we did. IPC formed a trusted supplier task group. We give numbers to it, and this one's called the 2-19B. Doesn't really mean anything. It's just the name of the committee. And we have over 60 industry volunteers on this committee that helped work together to write this standard. And the scope on the standard, as you can see in that next paragraph there, it's talking about printed board design, printed board fabrication, making the blank board, and assembly of the printed circuit board, along with cable and wire harness assembly, all the things that we talked about earlier. And then once again, we want to focus on companies that want to become trusted suppliers to deliver these products and services. And then this document defines the industry terms. It goes through a whole bunch of things that I don't want to get into right now, but basically it just covers all the aspects that we're going to be talking about here for cybersecurity. And then once again, there's focus on CUI, CTI, and the cybersecurity framework that we talked about on the last slide. Currently, the standard's at revision A, which was released back in January of 2020. The standard was originally released back in August of 2018, so it's been out now a little over 2 years. And we have a revision B due in May of 2021. So once again, this is a very fluid document, as you can tell, and the committee meets every month working on making improvements to this document because there's always new challenges coming up in cybersecurity. And my last bullet there is if anyone's interested in joining the committee, we're always looking for more volunteers. Even though we have 60 industry volunteers on this committee today, it's like most committees, maybe about 15 or 20 of them are real active. A lot of them are just kind of paper members, if you know what I mean. So once again, we're always looking for more volunteers who can help input into this standard. Now, what I'd like to talk about now is the certification program. So we have a standard. We have a copy of it there. It's just a black and white standard. It's not like some of our standards that have all the pretty pictures in them and things like that. This one's pretty dull. But anyway, once again, we had a standard, and then a lot of the customers and members of IPC wanted validation services to develop a certification program or a qualified manufacturer list program around this standard. And that's what the validation service department does that I head up. And I formed a subcommittee different from the committee that wrote the standard. And we started working on putting together a series of audit questions that we would audit companies to be compliant to this standard. So we worked on that. It took us about a year, and we got it done. And we came up, it's a typical 3-year certification. And we do annual assessments performed on each year. So like year 1, year 2, we do checkups, and then we do a full audit every 3 years. And the program is driven by the prime contractors that I mentioned earlier, the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, the Boeings, the Northrop Grummans. They wanted this program to make sure that people who comply to this standard got certified, so they know that the products and services coming from the subcontractors to the prime contractors were protected. And then there was a comfort level then when they were shipping products to the Department of Defense. Once again, we have 4 different audits in this program that I mentioned earlier. One for the designing of the printed circuit board, one for fabrication, which is making the bare board, one for assembly with all the components, the soldering, and then of course the cable and wire harness. And to pass these audits, you have to have basically a good quality system that we'll talk more about here in a minute, supply chain risk management policy, a security system, and you can imagine what that is, and then of course, chain of custody. In this next slide here, we'll jump into more of the details, what we're talking about with these 4 elements here. When we're talking about a quality system, there's a lot of quality systems out there, and we want to make sure that the customer is using, or the supplier is using, the right quality systems. And are they current? Are they up to date? In the military aerospace industry, it's a requirement that you have your AS9100, which is kind of a spinoff from the ISO 9001. And those are very heavily quality-driven management systems, where you have to document your processes and say what you do and improve what you do. And then there's some other accreditations that were listed there too. And we look at everything that the supplier has already done, and we just build off of that when we do our audit. We have audit questions built around that. And then we want to know about the supply chain. We want to know that making sure that suppliers aren't using counterfeit, that they have a good counterfeit detection system. Counterfeit components have been around for a long time, and we want to make sure that the circuit boards are using the proper components and not a bunch of fake components, or components that have little devices in them that can track things that we don't want them to track. We want to make sure they have some dual sourcing. We want to make sure they run their background checks on the suppliers, that they're using good suppliers. They're not buying components out of somebody's van or something, And of course, if there's a disaster, we want to make sure they have a disaster recovery plan. For example, if they're buying components from Thailand and there's a tsunami and the tsunami wipes out that supplier in Thailand, where are they going to get their parts if they don't have a backup plan? And then, of course, we want to make sure they're using good, financially sound suppliers. Once again, not some guy selling components out of the trunk of their car. Security system, we've talked about this already. They got to demonstrate compliance to that Nist SP 800-171 that we talked about earlier, which covers your CUI and CTI that we talked about. If they don't demonstrate the compliance, they're going to fail the audit. And they got to maintain their ITAR registration, and that has to be done every 12 months. They have to maintain that. And they have to make sure all their export controls, making sure that they track their shipments. A lot of problems that we found in doing these audits is sometimes when the products leave the company, they may package 25 products to leave, but maybe only 24 of them show up. What happened to that 25th one? Well, it got stolen. So, we want to make sure that they're checking to make sure if you ship 25 widgets, let's say from the contractor, 25 widgets show up at the Department of Defense. And then, of course, we want to do employee background checks, including criminal background checks. And usually, they'll just do the basic drug test. And no, we want to know more about that. We want to know the history. And then also, too, you have to be a U.S. citizen to work on a lot of these Department of Defense products. And then we also check the facility entrances. We've been on some audits where the front door was secure, but we went back to the shipping door and that was left wide open, and people were just walking in and out of the place free and just having a good old time. So we had to clamp down on things like that and find out if these places have security guards on site. A lot of them don't. And then we really focus a lot at IPC on training. I mean, Aaron's probably talked about that before, but IPC is really big on training, and we want the employees to be fully trained on their security systems for the company that they work at. Like insider threat training, what to do when they spot something, things like that. And then, of course, chain of custody. I mentioned that earlier. We got to make sure that the company has a policy for this, that they're controlling their documents, the traceability records, how they handle their scrap. You can learn a lot about a product just by looking at their scrap. Just a bare circuit board. You can take a bare circuit board and reverse engineer that and create a schematic from that circuit board. There again, there's some intellectual property that's escaped. And I mentioned earlier about shipping finished goods, being able to track those finished goods from point A to point B and making sure that everything gets there properly. So I know I've covered a lot here, and just to wrap up here a little bit, to summarize the importance of protecting CUI and CTI. We talked about the cybersecurity framework. IPC saw a need, so we got with industry and collaborated and came up with a standard. Then, of course, validation services, the department that I head up, we put together an audit certification program to make sure that companies were following this standard. And basically, once again, we've been talking about cybersecurity, what we're protecting. We have this factory of the future that IPC has been talking about, Industry 4.0. That's a whole nother presentation. I could give another day on that. But basically, really, I thought this might be a little corny, but I thought what we were protecting was our planet, and everything that goes with it. Granted, today's presentation was focused on the Department of Defense, but cybersecurity is a big thing, and that we should be thinking about it a lot more than we have been. So that's kind of my presentation. Once again, I'm going to take questions now, and hopefully I can answer them. Go ahead, Aaron.
All right, thanks, Randy. So everybody does have the ability to unmute or ask questions. You're welcome to post them in the chat, or you can ask. And I don't see anything just off the bat. So I have a question I can start us with.
Sure.
Randy, what's the big difference between classified and unclassified information?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, classified, if you remember from the TVs or the movies, that's the super, super top secret stuff. And you have to have only a handful of people know what that is. And that's usually at your senior levels, up at the president level of our country. But unclassified information is the information that you use just to do the basic job. Now, once again, we're focusing on printed circuit boards. And I'll give you an example. A designer will design a circuit board based on a schematic. So the schematic is considered unclassified information because you have to use that schematic to design the board. And then you create electronic Gerber files that shows the XY coordinates of where all the components go. Once again, that's unclassified information because you need access to that information to design the circuit board and to fabricate the circuit board. So those are two examples of unclassified information that you still have to protect, but a lot of people have to have access to it.
Good, thanks. All right, I have a question here. Arnolfo, do you want to ask it yourself? You're welcome to.
Sure. You can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, so you've been talking about some of these certifications. So if students were interested in trying to get some of these certifications, how much time and how much would it cost, if anything, to get these certifications as well?
Now, these certifications, we're certifying the company location. We're actually certifying their manufacturing area. So once again, the companies that we're targeting are, you know, the companies that supply products and services to the DoD. So for example, if Lockheed Martin is buying their circuit boards from TTM, which is one of the largest circuit board fabrication companies here in the US, and let's say one of their locations is in Sterling, Virginia, the validation service team then would go audit that Sterling, Virginia TTM facility to make sure that printed circuit board shop was following all of the rules of the 1791 standard. Does that answer your question? It's a factory certification, not an individual certification.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
For example,
Go ahead,
for example, I'm a certified interconnect designer or a CID. That's an individual certification where I took a class and then I took an exam and I had to score at least 80% on that exam to pass and get that certification for a certified interconnect designer. IPC has several certifications that individuals can get, and Aaron can talk more about those if he'd like. But we also have workforce development training where individuals can also learn a lot of knowledge about the things we're talking about. We currently don't have a program yet on cybersecurity for individuals, but that's something I know IPC has been looking at. But the difference there is validation services, the department that I head up, we focus on certifying the factory or the facility, the company location. Just wanted to be clear on that. Go ahead, Aaron.
Great. Yeah, and I provided a link to IPC's individual certifications if anybody wants to take a look at it. And typically, people will go to different certification training centers that will give you your IPC certification. But the info's on that link. And if anybody has questions, you're welcome to ping me after this and I can give you more info. Any other questions? We'll keep going.
Yeah, Aaron, this is Gerald Herder. I have a question for Randy.
All right, so we'll do Jerry and then Abdulazim. You can go after Jerry.
Yeah, Randy, in the cyber kind of discussions, most of the time you end up with a bunch of best practices. Any of those sources that you listed kind of would be a good best practices kind of link for the students to look at or just to get an exposure to?
You can go to that Nist website that is listed in the presentation, and there's a lot of good information you can get from that that's free and available. Also, if you want to, there's also some, if you just Google insider threat training, there's actually a free online class that you can take. It's like a 30-minute class, and there's also a simple little multiple choice exam at the end, and you can get a lot of knowledge on insider threat training that talks about espionage and sabotage and how people go around hacking into systems and things like that. And like I said, all that it's all available on the web and it's free. And that's a great question. And that way some of the students can, log in and just check that out.
Thanks, Randy. I think I found the link you're referencing, so I'll post it in the chat. Put on by the Center for Development of Security Excellence. Which
that's it.
That's it. Yeah. A government group.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, and all that. Like I said, there's no cost to any of this, and if you got some time to check some of these things out, it's very interesting.
Awesome.
Aaron, I think there was another question, or
there was Abdulazim, I believe.
He's on mute. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Actually, I think there are two, like small ones. Do you think if I go to your website and take like the class and I get a certification, can I get like a job with your company or stuff like that? And two, like, can you have like what kind do you have an advice to protect our cell phones and our portable electronics and stuff like that from hackers and scammers?
Aaron, I'm sorry, I was having a little trouble hearing that question. Could you help me with this one, or?
Yeah, I tried. It was a little fuzzy. Could you maybe type that into the chat, and we'll ask it? Sorry, your microphone's just a little hard to hear. But we'll jump to a different one from Hector Santana if he's available, or I can just ask it. So from Hector, can you describe the IPC standards committees and what the benefits would be to join?
Okay. Once again, all of our committees are volunteers, industry volunteers, and we have several committees, but the one I talked about today, the 2-19B, focuses on the trusted supplier, cybersecurity. Like I said, we have over 60 members from all parts of the industry, but most of it's focused on the Department of Defense. And I recommend it to a lot of young engineers, sometimes just to attend these committee meetings, just to hear what their peers are working on and what some of the other companies are working on. And it's a great networking tool to get together, especially if you're a young engineer and you may not quite sure what discipline you want to get into. I find these committees are very helpful, a lot of networking. I've seen people exchange resumes at these committees, you know, if they're looking for a job. Like because of COVID right now, everything is virtual, but I'm hoping here within 6 to 9 months, we'll get back to having live face-to-face meetings again. But right now, everything's all done virtually through Zoom. But I feel it's still a tremendous benefit to get involved with these committees, to learn more about the standard and learn more about how the process to develop these standards. And then, like I said, you'll get ideas as you attend these meetings on how to make the standards better.
Great, thanks, Randy. And I had a question about the 1791. It is published, correct?
Correct. It's currently at Rev A, and people can purchase it through the IPC online store. I think a paper copy is around $70. Don't quote me on that, but it's under $100 for a paper copy. And then, of course, you can get electronic single download too. I mean, when you buy documents through our online store, you have a couple of different choices. It's only about a 30-page standard right now, but it's very, very concise. And like I said, it's full of shall statements, hard requirements that the customer has to meet to be compliant to the standard.
Great.
And I see another question there. How long would it take to obtain the certification? Well, as I mentioned earlier, one of the components to pass this certification is you got to demonstrate compliance to that Nist SP 800-171 and those 110 requirements. And I've already had some customers, it's taken them a couple of years just to get that done. And then, of course, you still have to meet all those other requirements of the standard that I talked about, and the quality, the supply chain, the security, and chain of custody. There's requirements in all 4 of those sections you have to meet. For example, if your company doesn't have your AS9100 quality certification, we won't even start the process. And what we do is validation services team, we'll go through a pre-assessment with the customer where they get to see the audit questions up front. And if the validation services team feels the customer is not ready for the on-site audit, we'll postpone it. Oh, I should say we've also done some virtual audits too because of COVID. But once again, we won't even start even the virtual audit if the pre-assessment doesn't go well. So it can take a couple of years to answer your question to get ready for this program. It's a very complex program, and what we're learning is a lot of companies haven't been taking this cybersecurity stuff seriously. Even stuff like passwords. There's a certain way you need to control your passwords, and you'd be surprised how a lot of companies just don't control your passwords, and it's easy to hack into them. I've actually found people that use passwords that go 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not kidding. I go, my goodness. And I'm not even an IT person. Okay. I'm an old manufacturing engineer by degree, industrial engineer, actually. And if I can hack somebody's computer by typing 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got a serious problem.
That's funny. All right, good question. And just in case you were asking about individual certifications, it's usually 3 to 5 days of full-time instruction at a site. That's the common way to receive an IPC certification. And a lot of those are actually through companies. So companies will have trainers on staff and they will train new employees. But individuals can also go out and get IPC certifications, or smaller companies will often send employees to certification centers. But just to be direct, 3 to 5 days of full-time instruction is the common answer, depending on your certification.
And like I said, we also have that workforce development training. If somebody wanted to go to IPC, our website, and see that, you know, if you just want to get some basic knowledge on soldering or cable and wire harnesses or anything like that. Like I said, we don't have anything on cybersecurity yet, but when it comes to circuit boards and cable and wire harnesses, yeah, we've got a lot of good video seminars all online that you can take at your leisure.
Yeah, there's quite a bit that you can do from IPC, and our education team is would appreciate it if I phrase it this way. So we have workforce development training that you go to learn new material, and certifications are typically to demonstrate that you know that material. So a lot of students will ask about certifications, but it's actually more likely that you're looking to learn a new skill, which the workforce training might be the way to go. So,
Absolutely.
Okay. Randy, how often are companies audited?
This is a 3-year certification program with annual checkups. So we do a full either virtual or on-site audit every 3 years. And then on year 1 and year 2, we send out a spreadsheet that they fill out, and we do a conference call. And that spreadsheet just verifies, for example, that they maintain their ITAR registration, because they have to fill out this DS 2032 form every 12 months. And if they skip a year, then they're going to be in trouble. You know, if they don't, I'll give them a little grace period, but if they don't get it done by when they're supposed to, they could lose their QML certification. And that's not a good situation. So the validation services team kind of has to police all the companies that are on the QML to make sure they're following the rules throughout the entire 3 years.
Good. Any other questions in the chat or Q&A or?
There was one that we will be sending out these slides. Aaron has a copy of these slides, and Aaron will get these sent out, I guess, to all the participants, correct, I believe?
Yeah, sure. I can send the slides. We also will post the recording to the IPCEF.org website, and also probably on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I can say there's nothing confidential on these slides. It's all public information. No worries.
Very good. Okay. Last call for questions. All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time. We will wrap up here. Thank you, Randy. And thanks to those who asked questions. We'll make sure that we'll send. Oh, we do have one more.
We have one more.
We'll take one more.
Go ahead, Gerard.
Oh, well, actually, since we were wrapping up, Randy mentioned a little bit about quality systems, and I think that would be the topic of another good webinar for students.
Quality systems, okay.
Yeah, because quality kind of is, some departments have industrial manufacturing, and they often teach courses like that, but for most circuit board people, it's more of a subject kind of thing than it is a course. And so that'd be a good webinar for the future.
Yeah, okay. Gerard, I'll mention that IPC does not do quality audits. There's several other companies out there that do quality audits. I told you guys I used to work at a telecom company, and I used to be an ISO surveillance auditor. And we used the British Standard Institute, or BSI, was the auditing firm that certified my former company to ISO 9001. And my job was just to verify that my company maintained the rules to ISO 9001 in between the big audits that came from BSI, or the British Standard Institute. But there's TUV, there's PRI, there's a whole bunch of companies out there that do quality audits, and that's their focus. That's all they focus on, is quality audits. And yeah, you can, like I said, that's something else you can Google a little bit, is ISO auditors, and you'll find there's a bunch of companies that do that, and they'll even talk about all the different quality audits that they do. So I know that may not totally answer your question, Gerard, but that's some information some of your students could maybe do in the meantime. And then, like I said, Aaron, maybe we can talk later and find a good speaker for that particular topic.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for the feedback.
All right, last call.
All right, we will wrap it up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for attending, everyone.
And we will send out the information. Have a good day. You're
Bye
welcome.
now.